Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you wherever you are. My name is Daniel Feeks. I'm the head of the Implementation Support Unit of the Biological Weapons Convention here in Geneva. Thank you very much to all of you for taking the time to join us for this international webinar on review of developments in the field of science and technology related to the Biological Weapons Convention. It's very good to have you all with us this afternoon. We have around about 200 people registered for this meeting, so thanks very much for taking the time and for continuing your interest in this series of webinars that we're organizing in advance of the meetings of experts that will take place at the end of August and early September of this year. This is the third in the second series of webinars, so thanks very much, as I said, for continuing your interest. I will just now briefly run through some of the rules for the webinar. I'm sure you're all very familiar with them by now anyway, but please could we ask to have your microphones muted throughout the webinar. There are various options for you to engage in the discussion, and we would encourage you to participate actively in this webinar. We have time for Q&A at the end of the webinar as well. So you can see here on the screen the options to engage. You can raise your hand through the icon at the bottom of the screen if you wish to take the floor. You can send a written message through the chat to everyone if you wish to submit your comments in writing. Or you can also send a message directly to us as the host if you wish to have a question put by us to any of the panelists privately. The webinar is being recorded for those that aren't able to attend as we're doing it live. The presentations and the recording itself will also be made available on our website in a couple of days' time as well, again, for people that aren't able to join us in person today. Well, without any further ado, I will stop there. If you have any further feedback, please send it to us. There's the email address. And I will now hand over to Minister Katsuhiro Nakai from the Permanent Mission of Japan here in Geneva, from the delegation to the Conference on Disarmament. Minister Nakai, over to you. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Greetings from Geneva. Thank you very much, everyone, to take part in this second round of MX2 webinar from every part of the world. And of course, I really appreciate, I'd like to express my sincere appreciation for ISU to organize this important webinar in most timely manner. You may remember that it was October last year when we had the first round of MX2 webinar. At that time, we reflected what we discussed in the previous MX2 in 2018-19, refreshing a memory of what we have done, and review the pending and relevant proposals for the discussion of coming MX2 meeting. I invited state parties who promoted those proposals and asked them to brief on the current status of each proposals. And also I invited UNIDI or other organizations to share to talk about their relevant activities. Since then, so much have taken place. A lot of substantial development on issues related to MX2, particularly on code of conduct of the bioscientists and science and technological review mechanisms. Of course, in coming MX2 meetings, we will facilitate all open dialogue on MX2 agenda. But as MX2 chairs, I think it is very useful to focus the second round of webinars on the substantive development on those two subjects, code of conduct and science and technology review mechanism. You may recall that these two are also the issues which are expected to be part of the tangible outcome of the next review conference. But however, before starting the presentation on those subjects, I think it is very useful to reflect what we discussed on those two subjects in the previous MX2 meeting, and allow me to give a brief summary on them. In the last MX2 discussions, state party recognized that the rapid pace of scientific and technological development, especially recent breakthroughs in microbiology, brings many benefits in medical, pharmaceutical, industrial, and agriculture fields. State party also addressed the various technologies such as synthetic biology, genome editing, gene-derived techniques, and metabolic engineering in their deliberations. At the same time, the inherent dual nature of many scientific and technological development have become increasingly apparent, which arouses concerns about potential malicious use of pathogens in violation of BWC. Third party recognize the need for the BWC to address this through national and international measures that helps to ensure countries can benefit from the new development, while also maintaining essential level of biosecurity in an increasingly complex world. Our recurring debate within MX2s that remained important is how to strike the balance between ethics and scientific freedom within a context in which innovative technologies are being developed outside the reach of current regulations. Notwithstanding the existence of national and professional code of conduct or similar instrument as ethical guidelines, several regulations spoke in favor of the need of voluntary code of conduct and described national example of each code. Similarly, various state parties stress the importance of promoting a broad culture of responsibility and giving particular emphasis to educate to complement code of conduct, thus stressing the importance of bottom-up approach. State parties also encouraged the discussion on science and technological review process in the framework of the convention to monitor relevant developments and assess the potential implications, and different proposals were presented. Science and technological review mechanisms are already established in other disarmament conventions and organizations, including the IAEA and OPCW. During this intersessional period, states parties have been informed of the invaluable service these mechanisms provide to the international community by having independent, politically neutral, and expert-led review of science and technological developments that brings both potential benefit and risk to the country. With this brief introduction of what we discussed in the previous MX2 country meetings, I'd like to start the presentation according to the agenda which you have already shared. At the onset, I would like to express my deep appreciation for each presenter to squeeze precious time for us and share your views, ideas, and findings among the state parties before the MX2 meeting. All of them are most relevant for the coming MX2 meeting, the discussion. Then, yes, an important point. After the presentations, we are going to have good time for the question and answer. And the interactive the exchange of views based on questions are very important. As a moderator of this webinar, I'd like to encourage all participants to send in questions through the chat functions. Those questions we are going to compile those questions and try to structure good interactive discussion in the question and answer time. So do send us questions or findings or suggestions, whatever you feel. Allow me to start the presentations on those important the topics we are going to discuss. The first speaker of today's webinar will be Ms. Jiaodan Liu, Deputy Director of Disarmament and Arms Control Division of Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Ms. Liu has worked in the Department of Arms Control and Disarmament since 2001, and specifically within biosecurity issues since 2017. After much work in collaboration with many countries, Ms. Liu will be presenting an outline of the Chinese effort to promote a new code of conduct proposal to be submitted to the BWC. Ms. Liu, microphone is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Nakai. Thanks for giving me the floor to brief the development of the Tianjin Biosecurity Guidelines for Code of Conduct for Scientists. Rapid advances in the biological science and technology brings great well-being to humanity. It is a common responsibility for the global community to promote responsible conduct and sound development, as well as to prevent misuses of biological sciences, which is also a major topic for international biosecurity governance. China has always advocated responsible conduct of research, promoted establishing a voluntary code of conduct for biological scientists in 2015, and soon after submitted a draft working paper of the model code of conduct co-sponsored by Pakistan to the BWC, the 8th Review Conference. Since then, extensive and in-depth discussions has been conducted and beneficial suggestions were proposed. China highly values the work by all parties involved. It is our belief that it will be beneficial to listen to the opinions of all stakeholders, especially of the scientific community, to draft a model code of conduct for biological scientists. With our active support, the Tianjin University Center for Biosafety Research and Strategy, Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, and the Inter-Academy Partnership conducted active cooperation since the end of last year. On the basis of the Chinese and Pakistan working paper, TGU, JHU, and IAP held 2 workshops to discuss biosecurity guidelines for codes of conduct, together with scientists of academia and industry from more than 26 parties. As a result, there comes the Tianjin Biosecurity Guidelines for Codes of Conduct for Scientists that now has been submitted to the Inter-Academy Partnership for endorsement. Representatives from Ministry of Foreign Affairs of China and the US Department of State took part in the process of discussion. The Tianjin Guidelines considers diversified practices of various countries and concludes core elements related with responsible conduct of research. We encourage all parties to refer to the Tianjin Guidelines on a voluntary basis to promote global security. China will submit a working paper to the BWC with the Tianjin Guidelines as an annex. We welcome co-sponsorship from these parties and work together for the 9th Review Conference to endorse, and also encourage dissemination of the Tianjin Guidelines once endorsed by the Inter-Academy Partnership. Now, I will give the floor to colleagues from Tianjin University and Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security to give details on the process of development of the Tianjin Guidelines. Thank you, Minister Nakai.
Thank you very much. Yes, next, as introduced by Ms. Hughes, I'd like to invite Dr. Gigi Grombile, Senior Researcher at Johns Hopkins University, and Dr. Leifan Wang, Associate Professor at Tianjin University. These leading experts have been helping to facilitate the workshop series on the code of conduct, bringing together experts from around the world to exchange and develop joint ideas on their topics, helping to shape the new approach to the code of conduct of proposal, which is of great relevance to MX2 work. I'd like to invite those two experts to the screen. Please start.
Thank you, Xiaodong and the chair. I'm Leifan Wang from Tianjin University. I'm happy to give more details on the development of Tianjin Biosecurity Guidelines, along with Dr. Gigi Grombile from Johns Hopkins University. Our talk will cover 3 aspects of the guidelines. The first introduced the inspiration for the guidelines, which includes the model code of conduct for biological scientists, initially proposed by China and Pakistan, and the Hegel-esque guidelines recognized under the Chemical Weapon Convention. The second is on the current development of the guidelines. And the third is about our consultation for input from international scientific community on the content of the
Okay, I'll advance the slide. Hopefully Leifan will unfreeze. I'll just continue until she comes back or resets. Oh, Leifan, you can continue now.
Yeah, good. Thank you. In the BWC context, Tianjin Biosecurity Guideline is a result of a decade-long effort. As Xiaodong just mentioned, in 2015, China submitted a proposal for the development of a model code of conduct for biological scientists co-sponsored by Pakistan. In the 8th Review Conference, China and Pakistan submitted a working paper on this proposal, drafted by faculty at Tianjin University. Since then, Tianjin University has committed itself to promote this proposal. In 2018, the university and the BWC ISU co-hosted an international workshop on building a global community of shared future for biosecurity in Tianjin, which I believe some of you attended this excellent workshop. During that workshop, Mr. Ogortinsky, chair of the MSP, suggested to use to name this proposal with the term Tianjin to recognize the contribution of the university. At the same forum of the MX2, my colleagues, Professor Zhang Weiwen and Professor Xie Yang, reported the progress of the proposal. Next, the Hague-esque guideline is another inspiration for the development of the Tianjin Biosecurity Guidelines. The Hague Guidelines was developed by chemical practitioners over 24 countries to promote a culture of responsible conduct in the chemical sciences and to guard against the misuse of chemistry. Recognized under the Chemical Weapon Convention, the Hague Guidelines is widely disseminated and led to creation of subsequent codes of conduct in the field. Both the China-Pakistan proposal and the Hague-esque guidelines serves as the basis for cooperation to promote globally recognized norms for the ethical biological research. Since last December, Tianjin University, Johns Hopkins University, and IAP partnered together to develop the Tianjin Biosecurity Guidelines that we have submitted to the meeting. The Tianjin Biosecurity Guideline is the product of hard work of the representatives from the 3 institutions, as well as biological scientists from different countries that we have consulted. China Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the United States Department of State played a supportive role and helped us to plan and prepare for the consultation. As illustrated in its preamble, the Tianjin Biosecurity Guideline aims to prevent misuse of bioscience research without hindering beneficial outcomes, in accordance with the articles and norms of the BWC, and in advancement of progress towards achieving the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I would stop here and invite Dr. Gigi Granville to continue the presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you everyone for listening. We appreciate your interest in this. So there are 10 parts to the guidelines. And they can be categorized as including scientists' general responsibilities for biosecurity, their specific responsibilities for how they incorporate biosecurity throughout the research process, and also not just the scientists' responsibilities, but the how research happens, the institutions that enable research, and international cooperation in research and responsibilities basically throughout the research process. We're not going to read all of the guidelines to you at this time, but here are the first 2 that deal with ethical standards and laws and norms that include language about how scientists should respect human life, relevant social ethics. They should observe and be aware of all laws that relate to biosecurity. There are parts of the guidelines that include education and the important role of education for scientists as well. Just a little bit about the process that we undertook to create these and shape these guidelines. You heard that we had 2 international meetings with a diverse array of life scientists who are practicing scientists, as well as people with a lot of experience in biosecurity, people from academic research, as well as industry. We were intending to get feedback on our draft guidelines, and we got a lot of specific comments. We considered each an individual comment that was made during both meetings. We had calls with a lot of the participants to further discuss all aspects of this to make sure that it underwent a rigorous review. And we have the final draft guidelines, which are currently being considered by IAP for formal endorsement. And that we look forward to your questions when the time for questions arises. And here is our contact information for any additional questions or feedback. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed for the valuable presentation on one of the important agenda of MX2, Code of Conduct of Bioscientists. I'm very happy to hear from China, the promoter of this important subject, of their, on their view, how they are going to develop your proposal for the MX, together taking good stock of the discussions organized by Tianjin University and Johns Hopkins. Now I'd like to proceed to discuss the presentation on science and technological review mechanisms by starting in the year. We will now move on to the second half of the webinar. Since our last webinar, a lot of work has been done, directly involving state parties and national experts to explore and exchange and develop ideas on this important and complex topic. Next up, we will hear from Dr. James Leville, lead of the WMD program of UNIDIA on the research conducted by UNIDIA and funded by Germany related to the views of science technology review mechanism. James-san, microphone is yours.
Thank you very much, Minister Nakai-san. Can you hear me okay? Yep, okay, thank you.
I can hear you loud and clear.
Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to be able to speak at MX2. I will focus my short presentation on areas of divergence around a S&T review mechanism, as well as presenting some possible options for a mechanism for states parties to consider. In doing so, I want to be very clear we're not seeking to be prescriptive, but rather present states with ideas for further consideration. So essentially they serve as food for thought. In doing this, I'll also draw from a recent report written by my colleague, Ms. Alicia Aland and Giacomo Persipaldi and myself. The report is available from the website. Because some of the survey results have been discussed already, I won't dwell on these, but if I could have the next slide, please, Wenji. Thank you very much. I did want to make one point in relation to a survey that we undertook. This is a voluntary electronic survey of BWC states parties. One thing that was clear was that many states parties, and indeed most of those who responded to the voluntary survey, viewed a mechanism as important or essential. To be very clear, the survey is not statistically significant, but we do hope it provides an illustrative snapshot of views. And it shows that whilst many see this as important or essential, not all states parties view a mechanism as important or essential. And some states actually view this as less important or only of value as part of a wider package of measures agreed at the review conference. I think those views are important to keep in mind, and certainly in our report we've been very careful to make sure they're fully reflected along with the views of all states parties. With that in mind, next slide please, Wenji. For those that do support a mechanism, there are clear areas of convergence and divergence in the views of states parties. I will focus my attention on issues of divergence, both from the survey and the wider discussion and policy papers around this topic. And I think I do so because these will require further consideration, both at the intra and the international levels. One thing I was struck by, there may be, or there may not be a cohesive view on a mechanism across different departments or agencies within a country. So it is an area where further consideration is required, and particularly in three areas. the purpose and topic, participants and composition, and the funding and resources of any mechanism. These topics are interlinked. Choices made in one area can have significant implications for other aspects of a mechanism moving forward. So concerning the purpose of any mechanism, our survey showed that while many thought a mechanism was important or essential, they did not necessarily agree on why this was important and what it should do. In this regard, building a common understanding around why states parties require a review, who the review is for, and how any outputs or advice will be used can help in getting closer to developing a mechanism that meets the requirements of states parties. Clarity around the topics to address and the processes of determining specific questions will also require attention. In relation to the latter, unlike other review mechanisms in other organisations, there is no BWC Director General position, nor do we have strategic documents from which a list of topics could readily be identified. So models applied elsewhere in other S&T review mechanisms will not necessarily help. So this is an area that requires some further consideration. And in doing so, it's useful to think about how you could find a balance between a mechanism that enabled states parties to address emerging topics in a timely manner and a more fixed set of topics potentially determined by states parties at a review conference or another annual meeting. The second issue I wanted to talk about was the issue of participation or composition of any group. For some in the survey and the working papers, it seems to be an area where there is a clear divergence in the views of states parties. In the survey, many states parties favoured a limited set of participants nominated by states who would form a closed group of geographically representative eminent experts. In the survey, 19 out of 41 survey respondents that answered this question favoured a smaller group between 10 and 30 participants. Others, in contrast, favoured a more open-ended process of science and technology review, in which states were able to nominate an expert or experts to join the discussion, who would simply subsequently join or drop out depending on the nature of the topic being discussed. There are advantages and disadvantages to both of these models. The third point I wanted to draw your attention to is the issue of funding and resources. Particularly important here is the discussion about covering the costs of meetings, but also some form of institutional support. Indeed, interviews conducted over the course of this project all stress the importance of institutional support in order to have an effective and credible mechanism. And this was also reflected in the survey to some extent. But states parties will need to consider the financial implications of any mechanism and take into account, discuss further whether a mechanism would be funded by assessed contributions, voluntary contributions, or some combination of these. With these points in mind, and building on some of the data in the report, we identified 3 options for states parties to consider. Just to stress again, we are not seeking to be prescriptive, but we thought it would be useful to at least put forward some concrete ideas as to what a mechanism could look like. And if I may have the next slide, please, Wenji. Thank you. The first option that we put together was the idea of a limited participation model. This would loosely resemble mechanisms used in other organisations, such as the Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons Scientific Advisory Board. And it would draw on a group of 25 qualified geographically representative technical experts nominated by states parties who would serve for a maximum of 2 3-year terms. States parties would determine the topics for a group to address at each of the quinquennial, the 5-yearly review conferences. In addition, an intermediary body comprised of chairs of the MSP, the MX2 meetings, supported by the ISU, could potentially consider additional topics between review conferences. The group could meet in Geneva twice a year, first for a week to collect information, and then later in order to finalize a technical report, along with, where appropriate, recommendations. It's also apparent that virtual meetings could be applied and there would be cost savings to this approach. Moreover, this sort of model could have the advantage of a steady, stable, expert set of representative participants. And the next slide, please, Wenji. Thank you. The second model is an open-ended approach, which would allow any interested states party to send a maximum of 1 or 2 expert participants. In this model, the review conference could provide an overarching mandate for the open-ended mechanism, but individual states could submit specific topics or questions on emerging issues for consideration to a body comprised of the MSP chair and the ISU and perhaps the MX2 as well as the mechanism's leadership team, which would also be important. This group could collectively develop a sort of scoping paper to determine suitable topics or questions to be addressed. This links to another point which was raised in the wider discussion, that whatever you task a scientific advisory mechanism to do needs to be clear that it can actually be answered and addressed through scientific data. And that's quite important. It requires a little bit more thinking potentially. The open-ended group would meet once a year in Geneva. Further outputs could be developed through virtual meetings. And this sort of model could address some of the points raised in the survey that, and I quote, all states parties have the right to participate in any discussion under the convention. It could also potentially have greater capacity to address emerging questions in a more timely manner. And now if I can move to the penultimate slide, please, Wenji. In the past, the two approaches discussed above have been presented sometimes as a binary choice. You kind of pick one or the other. I would argue that could be a bit misleading. There are ways in which they can be combined as part of a hybrid review process, and there are variants here. The one we have laid out in the report would begin with an open-ended meeting of 1 week duration, potentially organised in conjunction with existing scientific conferences on a topic of relevance to the BWC. This technically focused meeting would be open to all nominated qualified experts, as well as potentially international experts from outside government. A rapporteur from the ISU or a team could then develop a factual technical report, which would be sent to states parties, as well as the BWC Science and Technology Committee of some form that would be comprised of a limited number of 20 qualified experts nominated by states parties and reflecting wide geographical balance. This committee would be responsible for synthesizing the technical report into an accessible briefing materials and developing the implications and, where appropriate, recommendations for consideration by states parties. As indicated, there are variants on this particular hybrid model, but it might provide a compromise between differing perspectives. So it's clear that there are options available to states parties. And I would add that science and technology advances, as indicated in earlier discussions in this webinar, are clearly of relevance to several articles of the BWC. But this is not just about risks. Scientific and technological advisory or review mechanism could also look for opportunities as well. Could you move to the last slide, please? Thank you. So there could be benefits to maximizing the opportunities and mitigating the risks posed by advances in the life science and related areas of science and technology. At the same time, I think it's important to reiterate that a discussion on a science and technology review mechanism cannot be detached from the wider politics of the BWC and is unlikely to make progress at the 9th Review Conference unless it forms part of a wider package of measures reflecting the interests of all states parties. And I'd just add that I think this really does point to the importance of substantive preparations ahead of the 9th Review Conference. And final slide, please, Wenji. The report, which forms the basis of this, is available on the UNIDIR's website, along with other materials. I'd like to thank the German Federal Foreign Office for support on this project. Thanks also to France, Norway, and the Philippines for supporting UNIDIR's wider work on the Biological Weapons Convention. I'm of course happy to take questions now or bilaterally with anybody at your convenience. And I'll stop there, but thank you, Minister Nakai-san, and back over to you.
Thank you very much, James-san, for the very comprehensive briefing on your very important survey. One of the science and technological review mechanism is something that, as MX2 chair, would like to further combine the views on state parties. Therefore, your survey shows a wide range of views on this issue among state parties and show some of the contentious points with option how we proceed. This briefing is of great relevance, and I appreciate very much for German government to fund to this project. Now we will have an opportunity to learn about the impact of this research on shaping a German proposal on science and technological review mechanism. Germany has already made a very substantial and well-crafted proposal for science and technological review mechanism. In the wake of this unity research, and as MX2 chair, I'm very much interested in how Germany, what the German plan, how to proceed your proposal. The update will be delivered by Mr. Thomas Goebel, head of the Biological and Chemical Weapons Unit in German Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Mr. Goebel has over 20 years of experience in the department field, disarmament field, and worked specifically on the BWC for the same years. So now the microphone is on yours, Mr. Goebel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nakai. First of all, I would like to thank the ISU for arranging this webinar. I think it is very timely to trace the way ahead on an issue which is, as you said, in the focus of German interest for a long time. Yes, the establishment of a scientific advisory process within the convention. The German contribution from 2019, you mentioned the working paper entitled Rethinking the BTWC Science and Technology Review, a renewed case for a scientific and technological experts advisory forum, suggested broad parameters for such a forum and was the German departure point in a certain way in this discussion. It is still valid as it offers different approaches and solutions to the issue. But since then, we have continued trying to move the debate forward to add expertise and data in preparing for a decision of the review conference. We have just heard the presentation of the UNITIR survey, and I think perhaps some of you were able to follow the more comprehensive presentation event yesterday. Unfortunately, I wasn't, but I would like to thank the authors, James Rebel, Alicia Annan, and Giacomo Pauini today for this important work. The study provides rich data on the discussion, the fundamental decisions to prepare for, and the positioning of member states on the issue. I'm sure that it will become a most valuable basis for further discussions leading up to the review conference. So the BTWC just celebrated its 50 years anniversary, but we all know since 1972, we have been witnessing rapid and revolutionary advances in life science, including convergences with emerging fields such as artificial intelligence, additive manufacturing, or robotics. So these developments offer unprecedented opportunities of furthering the convention's aims, but the bad news is that they may also increase proliferation and security risk and have implications for the long-term viability of the BTWC. But as we heard, there are good news too. There is today a broad support for the idea of a certain form of structured scientific advisory process within the BTWC. And as James Earl just has shown to us, the report has long been growing with all regional groups and is now obvious and undeniable. I think today there is a broad agreement that such a science and technology mechanism or forum is long overdue. And we have a lot of valuable input on the table, and we are engaged in intensive discussions on key issues like mandate and output, expertise and independence, composition and funding. But I won't elaborate today on this different, so very important issues. I would just share with you two more general remarks, which Germany would like to observe as a guideline in the further discussions leading up to the review conference. So first of all, at the end of the day, we will have to find a structure for the scientific and technological experts advisory forum working under the conditions of the BTWC. So none of the questions raised just by James Revel in the report will be answered in the end in an entirely satisfying manner. There will be no state-of-the-art solution. The reasons are known to all of us. The BTWC has no strong organization to implement or coordinate such a decision. The BTWC is already underfinanced. And last but certainly not least, the convention is a consensus exercise. It means everybody has to agree in the end. The solution found has to be supported or at least accepted by all members. So I think it's important to recall these basic realities before starting dreaming of a scientific advisory board OPCW style. This does not mean that we cannot profit from the experiences of other regimes. We tried to do so in a workshop with Unity last December, and there is certainly merit to look for best practices. Second point, when preparing for a decision on a scientific and technological experts advisory forum for the review conference, we have to keep in mind that we are not negotiating a new BTWC, the treaty that remained unchanged since 50 years. We are discussing just a tool for the treaty, an important tool, but just an instrument which per definition will have to be flexible, which will have to develop in time. And this will be necessary because it will have to react efficiently to new challenges, challenges we still ignore even the existence. So we should be courageous. We should feel free to give it a try. Structure, composition, the mandate of such a body should not be a decision carved in stone. The establishment should be seen as the beginning of a process leading hopefully to perfection sometime, but starting with something certainly much less perfect. So with this in mind, I think it will become easier to find the right answers to the issues on the table. Just some words concerning mandate and composition to show you what I mean. Not only in the interest of the independence of the Scientific and Technological Experts Advisory Forum, but also to keep it flexible, to give room for development and improvement, its mandate should be not too focused and narrow. In establishing such a body, the BTWC members should agree only on a kind of framework document outlining the scope and the task. This could then be elaborated further in the years to come. We don't need the perfect solution at the beginning. The same holds true for composition. Since science and technology will continue to evolve, Scientific and Technological Experts Advisory Forum would need to be sufficiently dynamic to adapt to changing circumstances. So also the composition should be flexible. We put forward the idea of a broad roster of international experts managed by the ISU, listing up experts from each regional group on which to call for specific expertise if needed. In cases where particular expertise is required, which cannot be provided by its members, the body could draw upon ad hoc external expertise from such a list or other pertinent sources. So, in my view, we will have to work in the direction of a more open-ended or hybrid model as just presented by James Revel. And such a roster idea could have its place in there. One last word on funding. Yes, funding is certainly important. We all know that. And given the actual financial situation of the convention, the organizational structure of the solution should be certainly as slim as possible. But I'm convinced that if we were to find a reasonable and agreeable model, the financing will not be the major obstacle at the end. We would be certainly able to find solutions combining regular budget and voluntary contributions to show the way. As long as we are not dreaming of a state-of-the-art solution, as I pointed out at the beginning. So, to conclude, I think COVID-19 made it more difficult for all of us to move things forward since 2019, but it served also as an alarm bell. It has become crystal clear to everybody that biological pathogens know no boundaries, and what is true for accidental releases or naturally occurring pathogens also holds true for deliberate misuse. If against the background of the experience of this actual pandemic, we will not be able to agree on something in 2022, I fear that we will never agree. So let's make full use of the time remaining, putting the elements on the table together and being at the same time courageous and realistic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Goebel. I appreciate your upgrade of German idea how to proceed that science and technology review mechanism and proposals in the BWG process. And also, I share with the same need to be courageous and very flexible in order to achieve something concrete and tangible in the coming review conference. Otherwise, BTWC may lose international credibility and relevance. With your encouragement as MX2 chair, I will do my best. And actually, now, last but not least, we have a pleasure to having Dr. Jennifer Maccabi from the Federation of American Scientists present to us the most up-to-date findings of the ongoing workshop series related to science and technological review mechanisms. These workshops, German and also Russia, which are proposing a special proposal for this for the science and technology review mechanism, and Japanese experts are taking part in it. This is one of the most relevant exercise in relation with MX2s. I'm very happy to hear the update of the findings and the plan for the final session of this series, which is I heard coming very soon. Jennifer-san, microphone is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Nakai, for inviting me to participate in this important webinar on MX2 of the BWC. And thanks also, of course, to the ISU for helping to organize it. As you all know, in recent years, many states parties of the Biological Weapons Convention have strongly supported efforts to establish a systematic scientific advisory process to provide timely advice on the implications of dramatic advances in science and technology, in particular biotechnology. The Federation of American Scientists conducted a workshop in March 2021 to focus on the modalities of concern to states parties regarding such an advisory body, drawing on previous discussions and exchanges among BWC states parties. Participants explored the areas of convergence as well as those that require resolution. The second workshop will focus on developing solutions to those key issues. The aim will be to develop a broadly supported recommendation for the BWC preparatory discussions leading up to the next BWC review conference in 2022. The report and initial findings from the first workshop have been distributed to participants and the BWC states parties in Geneva, and I will review those here. We have drawn on these findings to formulate a proposed approach for consideration at the second workshop. Unfortunately, I can't share with you the results of the second workshop as it is only taking place tomorrow and on the 7th of July, 2 parts. And first, I would like to express great appreciation for supporting this project to the US Department of State and Open Philanthropy, as well as the assistance in coordination from the Inter-Academy Partnership. We thank them all for their deep interest in this issue. We were very pleased that participants in our workshops came from more than 25 countries in all 5 UN regional groups, and they include technical experts, policy experts, and diplomats. As you know, in recent years, a number of states parties have submitted working papers at BWC meetings relating to the establishment of a science advisory process. If we've just heard about one, in particular, the Russian Federation, Germany, and the United States have proposed approaches to such a body, and key representatives from those 3 countries spoke about their proposals at our workshop. Participants in the workshop were in general agreement that the BWC needs a scientific advisory body, and that states parties should adopt a decision to establish such a body at the 9th Review Conference in 2022. They also recognize that the states parties will need to consult and make compromises well in advance of the review conference in order to overcome the differences, which are often political, and to achieve consensus. The recent UNIDIR report that you've just heard about notes that BWC states parties do not consider an advisory body, some states parties, sorry, do not consider an advisory body important, although none of those participants in the workshop suggested it. However, the workshop did not include participants from some of the countries that might hold this view. As the chairman of the 2019 meeting of experts said, there appears to be broad convergence of views concerning many features of such a body, including the need for geographical diversity, a broad range of scientific expertise, insulation from political influence, and adequate personnel and financial resources. Nevertheless, the workshop discussions also revealed areas of divergence in the mandate, the composition of the body, and resources. The workshop discussions revolved around these elements and highlighted that many of the issues are connected. Some of these are, you've basically kind of heard about from the UNIDIR report, so hopefully we work in synergy with each other on these issues. Regarding the mandate, participants thought that the purpose of the body would be to provide states parties information, impartial analysis, specialized advice, and reports with clear recommendations related to scientific and technical issues relevant to the convention to enable them to make sound decisions. Assessments should cover both potential risks for use contrary to the convention and potential benefits, such as disease surveillance, diagnosis, mitigation. Several participants expressed specific interest in focusing on the benefits and security of agriculture and gene editing. Participants generally thought that the mandate should be a brief, broad framework that tentatively outlines the scope and tasking for the advisory body. Noting that the perfect might be the enemy of the good, some participants suggested that the efforts should focus on establishing a scientific advisory body, that implementing details could evolve and be reviewed after the first few years of experience and be adjusted. Regarding the selection of specific issues that the scientific advisory body would consider, some participants suggested that the advisory body should address issues selected by states parties, while others thought that the body itself should decide on the issues to be studied. So it was suggested that a combination of the two approaches might be possible, wherein both the advisory body and individual states parties could propose issues, and the states parties would decide on the work program. One of the more contentious issues to be resolved in the formation of an advisory body is who would participate. You've just heard a bit about this from James, and we have similar kinds of suggestions, not exactly the same. Workshop participants discussed in particular the differing views on whether the advisory body would have a limited membership of 20 or 21 as proposed by Russia and Germany, or alternatively, be open to participation from all BWC states parties as proposed by the United States and supported by China and others. A suggestion was also made that a hybrid approach might be considered in order to balance inclusiveness, expertise, independence, geographic representation, diversity, and affordability. Workshop participants suggested a variety of alternatives, such as a two-tiered arrangement of members and observers, a limited number of members augmented by temporary working groups, or a body comprising two parts, a scientific and technical experts advisory forum open to experts from all states parties, and a standing advisory panel of 25 experts who would be chosen on the basis of their expertise in a relevant scientific or technical field. Some participants noted, however, that the only way to secure the support of all countries for a proposed advisory body is to let them know that they can be part of it. The term of participation in the advisory body would be for 3 years, renewable for a second term. Workshop participants believed that members should be nominated on the basis of their technical degree and relevant expertise in a scientific field, not on political considerations. They believed that members should be as geographically and professionally diverse as possible, and that gender balance should be taken into account. Participants stressed that the advisory body should provide advice that is impartial, independent, and based solely on technical factors. For that reason, members of a scientific advisory body should work on their individual expert capacity and be independent of any government. Regarding the output, the participants in the workshop concurred that the advisory body should produce written technical analysis, reports, and possible recommendations, as well as providing briefings. It would hold at least one meeting each year with the option of additional virtual meetings. Participants emphasized that the advisory body should work by consensus, and if consensus could not be achieved on its conclusions and recommendations, the report would reflect the differing views. Regarding chairmanship, many thought that the body should elect a chair from among its members, with the chairmanship possibly rotating among the 3 BWC regional coordination groups, although some thought that the meeting of states parties should elect the chair. However, looking at the positive experience and technical discussions of a comprehensive nuclear test ban treaty, it was suggested that the chair could serve for an extended number of years in order to ensure stability and continuity with a sustained leadership team who could build strong relations and confidence and who could become intellectually invested in the process. Regarding resources, workshop participants recognized that creating an advisory body will entail increased funding for meetings, a new ISU staff member, possible interpretation, and document translation, possible travel support. The estimated additional cost would be 450,000 euros. And I think this is one of the differences with the UNIDIR report, if you wish to compare the two. The actual funding needs would depend on the number of meetings, of course, and the number of temporary working groups. Participants suggested that the additional costs could be funded by assessed contributions or by a combination of assessed contributions and voluntary funds. And that's a summary of our report. Thank you so much, Minister Nakai.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jennifer-san, for briefing your workshop's findings and future plan. One of the serious challenges for MX2 chair is how to find the common ground among competing proposals. And what this workshop is doing is most pertinent and useful and relevant in finding out how I should proceed the preparation for MX2 meeting. And awfully sorry that because of the timing problem, I cannot organize this the webinars after the second round of FAS seminar, in which we can find more, in which we can hear much more findings. But I will take part in the tomorrow's and July 7th second round of webinar and take full advantage of what I learned in the second round of action. Thank you very much.
Well, we're very pleased to have you join. Thank you.
And thank you very much for all our fantastic speakers for sharing the expertise and updates the activity in order to help us to make substantial progress within MX2. Now we are in the question and answer session, and we have already got a good number of questions to each participant. But at the same time, I'm happily pleased to receive the request to take the floor from our Pakistani and Chinese delegation here. Warmly welcoming their participations. If I can, I'd like to invite first Pakistani friends and Ambassador Lees. Microphone is on you, Omar-san.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I wish to start by thanking yourself and the BWC ISU for organizing this webinar. My delegation considers this as a very useful opportunity to discuss the important issues related to our intersectional work under the MX2 of BTWC. I also wish to thank colleagues from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of China, Tianjin University and Johns Hopkins University for the briefing on the development of the Tianjin Biosecurity Guidelines. As my Chinese colleagues recalled, the current guidelines have their roots in the Joint Code of Conduct for Biological Scientists developed and submitted by Pakistan and China to the last BWC review conference. And the process of the past 5 years, in our view, is an example of Pakistan-China joint contribution to the strengthening of the BWC regime. We are pleased to partner with China, and Pakistan remains very closely engaged in the process, which has resulted in the evolution of the current Tianjin Biosecurity Guidelines. Mr. Chair, I wish to highlight the collaborative approach of the process, which has involved not only state parties, but also academia and industry stakeholders. We feel that promoting responsible research in biological sciences remains a very important area of work for the BWC, and we look forward to continue working together with China and other interested state parties and stakeholders on this important initiative, particularly during the upcoming meeting of experts under your able chairmanship, and of course with an eye towards the 9th BWC review conference next year. I thank you once again for giving me the floor to make this brief contribution, and I look forward to the remainder of the webinar. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mohammed-san. I'm very encouraged to hear your warm word for us. And now, if I can, I'd like to invite Mr. Lees, the Chinese ambassador for this armament. I'm very much honored to have your participation. I'm very happy provide to give floor to you, Ambassador.
Thank you, Minister Nakai. I'm so happy to join this webinar today, and also so glad to see that under your able chairmanship, we have useful and intensive discussions on important issues, including the Tianjin guidelines. 6 years ago, China and Pakistan jointly initiated to develop a model code of conduct for biological scientists under the BWC framework. Thanks for the joint efforts by eminent scientists from more than 20 countries, including China, which include China, the US, Russia, European countries, and Asian, African, and Latin American countries. The current draft Tianjin guidelines was developed. We are looking forward to IAP's endorsement for these guidelines. This process fully reflects the determination and efforts of scientists from various countries and regions to further regulate scientific research activities. Such cross-continent process based on science and widely represented can be an effective approach to strengthen international biosecurity governance and cooperation. Against the backdrop of COVID-19, cooperation for biosecurity is even more urgent and relevant. The Tianjin process and the Tianjin guidelines fully reflect the responsible attitude of scientists and research institutions from China and all over the world to regulate their own behavior through international norms. The birth of Tianjin guidelines shows that the governments and academia can work together hand in hand with political determination and scientific attitude to strengthen biosecurity cooperation and to promote global biosecurity governance. And I believe this is also our concrete efforts to contribute to the process of the 9th Review Conference of the BWC. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you very much once again, Ambassador. Since China and Pakistan has proposed and promoted code of conduct of bioscientists in the discussion of the BWC, I'm very happy to hear your the statement from both countries on the after the briefing of the development of this important concept. Thank you very much indeed. And actually, yes, I have already received several questions, a good number of questions. I'm very happy to ask one question to each panelist and get answered respectively. At first, to Ms. John Dan Liu, one question about the next step of Chinese government in proposing the guideline for code of conduct. The question is, what are the next steps after the endorsement of the Tianjin biosecurity guideline by IAP? You mentioned that you are planning to propose working paper to the BWC process, but it will be very useful if you can share your idea how to proceed your proposal from now. And Ms. Yu, if you
Thank you, Ms. Kai, for the question. Actually, as I said during my presentation, and China is now the current status of this guideline is undergoing the IAP endorsement, and actually, it's the Tianjin University and Johns Hopkins University wrote a letter to IAP, the settlement governance committee, and also the steering committee for their endorsement. Actually, it's IAP's internal decision process. Now, all the parties involved are looking forward to the process to complete. I hope that in a short period of time, that IAP could go through all the process and give us a positive and clear answer to endorse this work jointly done by Johns Hopkins Center and also Tianjin University together with the IP Secretariat. For the next step of these guidelines, as I said during my presentation, that China and Pakistan is going to present another working paper to the BWC meetings. Since the IP process is not finished yet, so we currently we could not have the draft yet and have the final working paper yet. But of course, we will include the Tianjin guidelines as an annex to further promote the responsible biological science and research, and of course, we will welcome the co-sponsorship from all the 6 parties. So we will after we have the working paper, we will disseminate it, the working paper, to all these parties, and we hope that you will support it and co-sponsor it. And of course, for the upcoming NICE review conference, it's 5 years. Actually, it should be taken this year as planned, but due to the COVID-19, we've postponed the meeting, such an important meeting, to next year. And we do hope that this NICE review conference could achieve its outcome, and for those concrete proposals like COC, like of course the Certificate Advisory Body, like we discussed today, could have a result and to present to the global community that the parties of BWC have the resolution to strengthen the convention and to promote the effectiveness and authority of the convention. And so it's not only about the COC, but also about the effectiveness of the convention. So that's my answer to the question. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Liu-san, for your to sharing your idea. How you are going to proceed develop the Chinese proposal in the wake of this successful joint projects by Johns Hopkins and Tianjin University. And I very much strongly encourage to present working paper as soon as possible, if possible, for MX2. It is most important to present your views officially for the BW discussions. And your proposal for the guidelines is very much in line with the mainstream argument of the BWC. It has a very good chance to fly. We are very much looking forward to your working paper. Thank you very much. And following these questions, two questions for maybe for both Dr. Wang and Dr. Gronville of Tianjin University and Johns Hopkins. Two questions. First one is the benefit of the guidelines. In light of the quickly developing innovations, what are the immediate benefit of adopting guidelines for code of conduct within the field of science and technology? Things are quickly developing. What is the merit to adopt the guideline at this moment? Is one question. A second question is future, next step. How do you plan to further promote a Tianjin biosecurity guideline among scientists? Among scientists, not only among the governments, it's very important to promote this such guideline among scientists. So how to promote this guideline among scientists? There are two questions to Dr. Gronville and Dr. Wang of Johns Hopkins and Tianjin Universities. I'm very happy if you can share some of your reactions or idea on those two questions. Microphone is either of these two doctors.
Sure, I'll start, and
please,
thank you so much for these questions. So, as you know, there are many considerations for scientists when they're doing their work, and it's and these guidelines are focused on biosecurity. We expect that scientists adhere to more parts of ethical conduct and publications and all kinds of other rules that they have to follow in addition to biosecurity. So we see this as a wonderful way to kind of give a cassette of biosecurity considerations amongst the many other responsibilities that scientists have. So the benefit of this is it calls out specific things that scientists need to adhere to for biosecurity. And even though the pace of science, as you know, is quite rapid and many things happen over the course of the years, these guidelines, while focused on biosecurity, are not so tied to specific biological advances that it will be out of date anytime soon. It's general enough for the process of science that the benefits will last for quite some time. As far as dissemination of the guidelines goes, there are many, many ways that we can inform scientists in the way that they do their work, and conferences in other organizations like the IAP. IAP itself has an extensive reach and to be able to help scientists learn about the guidelines. And we hope that there will be future educational efforts so that we can, just like the Hague Ethical Guidelines, that we can promote and educate people about why they should adopt the biosecurity guidelines into their own work. Thank you.
Ms. Naki, thank you very much for the question. I will focus my answer on the scientists and the guidelines. Actually, what we asked is also our questions in the process of the development of the guidelines. I think we did several works. First, we try our best to make these guidelines formulated by the scientists themselves, to create a kind of ownership by scientists themselves. So we held 2 workshops and give the opportunity to let the scientists to express their views, their concerns about how to make the science responsible. We incorporate their views and concerns into the texts of the guidelines. The second, what we will do is to emphasize the training and the education on the responsible science among the young science, which is also the issue we discussed a lot at the 2 workshops. The scientists express their views how important of the training and applications are to the younger generation. We also encourage the state parties to do the similar process, which is to formulate the code of conduct, engage in the process of the formulation of the code of conduct, engage the scientists as widely as possible. Second, to make these guidelines be part of the materials in their training and education for younger generation, to raise their awareness from the beginning of their career. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mavan-san, to share your insightful views on these challenging questions, which are of great values for me to developing my idea toward MX2. Thank you very much. And actually, we have get several interesting questions regarding the science and technological review mechanisms. And one of the questions is to our Mr. Goebel, German participants, on what is the next steps of Germany in the wake of very useful survey of the media. But unfortunately, Mr. Goebel has already left. So maybe it's, I would have this discussion with Goebel and share it with participants in other forum. And apart from that, several interesting questions on mechanism. Maybe it's, I can introduce 3 questions, and I can invite both FAS, Dr. Jennifer Sands or James San, to share their view on those 3 points. The first one is the primary focus of attentions in the coming MX meeting. What element do you believe should be the primary focus of attention for sales party regarding a possible development of science and technological review mechanism. James San or Jennifer San, grateful if you can share your views on those questions.
James, are you there, or would you like me to go first?
Please go ahead, Jennifer.
The most important part, I assume, would be actually the scope and what the scientific advisory body would be responsible to discuss. We have had very interesting discussions about this in our workshops, and I think most people wish to focus on, as I said, the possibilities for advancement in science, as well as the possibilities for possible nefarious uses. And we are open to that discussion once the body is formed, of course. Our primary focus is on getting it established. And this is what we are trying to focus on in our workshops. And also the composition of the body, of course, is the most important issue that needs to be solved. And that's what we, in particular, and I think UNIDIR too, are focused on. James, I leave it to you to follow up.
I think, if I may, Minister Nakai, I would agree with Jennifer's point then. I think working out the objective, I think, would be useful. Building some sort of shared common understanding on what states parties want any mechanism to do, what they want it to produce, and who that material will be for, I think will be helpful in shaping something which will suit the requirements of states parties, or better suit the requirements of state parties. And as Mr. Goebel, I pointed out before, it's not necessarily going to be perfect. These mechanisms are the mechanisms that exist currently, do evolve, they change, new personalities come in, things change in terms of their shape. I think at least having a starting basis it would involve in time as well, a mechanism in the BWC. Thank you.
I could just add a couple of words. I mean, I think that a lot of people see that there's not enough time focused on scientific and technical issues in the current situation. Under the intersessional program, we only get a couple of days at most. And it's really important that the BWC be kept kind of in the loop, as they say, on scientific and technical issues. Many states parties need to be up to date and updated on all of these matters. I mean, even take the COVID recent examples, the developments in vaccines, all sorts of amazing developments in gene editing and so forth, which could likely be discussed in such a body. This would be most important.
Thank you very much indeed. Actually, one follow-up question, since both of you mentioned the importance of the proceed discussion mechanisms. In the discussion of composition and mechanism of the science and technological body, what has been almost the contentious issue, the independence. So there are a few questions to both of you. If I may come back, if I'm allowed to come back, both of you, how can we ensure the independence of the science and technological mechanism BWC? On the issue of the independence, grateful if I can ask again the view of both of you on this issue.
I'm happy to go first and then hand over to Jen. I mean, I think it's a point which both Jennifer and Thomas raised earlier, and I think is important. I'd certainly stress that it was something that became very clearly apparent in the interviews that we conducted. If you want to have an effective and credible mechanism, it needs to maintain independence. Now, there are several tools that could be used to do this. This could include explicit instructions to participants, explicit references in the terms of reference for participants in any mechanism. Declarations of competing interests are used in WHO advisory committee mechanisms. You could have an evaluation of participants' technical credentials as well. But I think in addition to particular tools which could be developed, I think that the chair will play quite an important role in shaping the independence of any mechanism and steering that conversation away from political discussions. So too will the questions that states parties ask of any mechanism. If you ask a political question, you will get either a non-answer or you will get a more political answer. So the shaping of the questions will also be fundamental in that as well. So there's some food for thought. Yeah, I'll stop there. Thank you, Mr. Nakai.
Well, I could add, if you wish, we have discussed this quite a bit also in our workshop, and it was felt that members of the advisory body would work in their individual expert capacity and be independent of any government or other group. And in a way, they would take a pledge to that effect. The members would be selected through an impartial process. Only citizens of states parties would be eligible to serve as members of the body or its temporary working groups. And the rules of procedure of the advisory body would include provisions on conflict of interest and a code of conduct to that effect. A lot of people focused on this experience of the OPCW in this regard, and they have some pretty severe conditions for serving on a body.
Thank you very much once again to both of you. And thank you very much for those who sent questions, who send in questions for to engage in the discussion, interactive discussion. And I appreciate once again for all those participants to share valuable views on those topics, on those issues. Now it's already 90 minutes, and we have already consumed the essence of the questions I have got. I'd like to conclude this the second round of the MX2 webinar. Once again, it was a valuable opportunity to share the important developing of the issue to be covered in the coming MX2 meetings. In this regard, once again, I'd like to express my sincere appreciation for those presenters to share their latest views and findings of their projects, and also the active participations and wide and active participation of the state party and state parties and interested parties. As a chair of MX2, so much I can learn in this webinars and appreciate your contributions. As MX2 chair, I'm always open to any discussion or suggestions. So if you have any more further ideas, please do send it to me and help me to guide the MX2 meeting in the most constructive manner. And just one notice: in order to structure the constructive discussion in MX2s, as many of you might have already known, as MX2 chair, I'm inviting interested state parties to join the informal consultations scheduled in the second week of August. In 2 days' time, end of this month is the end of the registration period. So those who are interested to take part in the informal consultation, please do so. As of now, 40 cross-regional participants are coming for discussions, which includes countries which have proposed specific proposals for science and technological review, the code of conduct, or presented by the variable working papers. As many in this webinar stressed, it is most important to promote the convergence of views in MX as much as possible to contribute to make the contribution for successful review conference, which means to produce substantial tangible outcome to address the issue of common interests. As at MX2, we have a lot of issues to work upon, particularly code of conduct and science and technological review. In the wake of these webinars, your active participation for informal consultation is most welcome and help me to guide the constructive discussion in MX2 towards the successful outcome of the review conference. With this request, I'd like to conclude the second round of webinars. Thank you very much for all the participants, particularly for presenters and ISUs. Thank you very much once again, and see you very soon in MX2. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.